Imagine for a moment that you walk into a high-end casino. The lights are dim. The carpet is plush. The pit boss stops you at the velvet rope and points to a specific VIP table in the center of the room. He hands you the contract for the game. The terms are explicit. He tells you 70% of players at this table lose their entire net worth. And the rules regarding the winners? Even if you beat the odds, even if you are in the lucky 30%, the house reserves the right to keep half your winnings, confiscate your future earnings, and destroy your reputation in the town square. You ask him, "What is the buy-in?" He smiles and says, "Everything you have built, your emotional stability, your financial future, and your sanity." Would you sit at that table? Would you bet your life on a game where the dealer can change the rules in the middle of a hand? Of course not. In the financial world, we would call that fiduciary negligence. We would call it suicide. But that is exactly the contract millions of men sign every single day. It is the standard operating procedure of the modern dating market. And yet, when a man looks at these odds, analyzes the data, and decides not to play, society does not call him prudent. They do not call him an intelligent investor. They call him a failure. They call him lonely. But let's audit that term. Loneliness. There is a comment from the late Robin Williams that has surfaced in our dataset. It is not poetry. It is a risk assessment. He said, "I used to think that the worst thing in life was to end up all alone. It's not. The worst thing in life is ending up with people who make you feel all alone." This is the paradox of the modern male. You are told to fear solitude, but the data shows that solitude is an asset, a controlled environment with zero volatility. The relationship? That is the liability, a high-risk venture with diminishing returns. We have created a world where walking away has become the only rational choice, not the easy choice, the rational one. Welcome to the audit. Let's begin with the macroeconomic view. In economics, when the price of a commodity skyrockets, while its inherent quality plummets to zero, we call it a bubble. In the sexual marketplace, we call it hoflation. This is a term derived from the sharp disconnect between asking price and market value. You see this every day. You have a liability, a partner with consumer debt, emotional baggage, and a subconscious script that demands constant validation. And this liability is demanding an asset. A man with a six-figure salary, 6 feet height, property, and the patience of a therapist. The math does not math. It is the equivalent of watching someone list their 1995 Honda Civic for the price of a Ferrari, simply because they installed new seat covers. The engine is broken. The transmission is slipping. But the asking price is premium. One observer in our database, Aluvan, simplified this market dynamic perfectly. Most men are minimalist, and most women are materialistic. As simple as that. This creates a fundamental supply chain failure. You are bringing resources to a table where the other party is only bringing demands. Let's look at a specific case study of this hoflation in action. Consider the job interview, also known as the modern dinner date. A 28-year-old software developer. He is a high-value asset. He earns $80,000 a year. He is genuine. He takes a woman to a high-end restaurant. The bill comes to $150. Now, in a rational market, an investment of $150 should yield a return. Perhaps conversation? Perhaps a connection? But what is the reality? She spends the entire evening on her device. She is photographing the food. She is tagging the restaurant. She is updating her story for 500 followers who do not care about her Does she tag him? No. Does she acknowledge he is paying? No. To her, he is not a partner. He is not a romantic prospect. He is a content creation assistant. He is an unpaid intern holding the lighting rig so she can simulate a lifestyle she cannot afford. And at the end of the night, she says, "This was boring," and leaves. He experienced a 100% loss of capital, a negative ROI, and the market tells him he should be grateful for the opportunity to lose his money. This brings us to the bare minimum trap. Men are conditioned to believe that providing security is their duty. You work 60 hours a week, that's the bare minimum. You pay the mortgage, bare minimum. You fix the car, bare minimum. But what happens when the liquidity crisis hits? What happens when the provider needs provision? We have a report from Kelvin Payne, a man currently on sick leave payments. This is a critical data point regarding reciprocity. He writes, "I'm on sick leave. Money can't stretch a week, let alone 2. A rational partner would pivot to support mode. But his partner? When my GF asked, "Can she borrow 200?" I laugh. And she begs and begs. He gave in. He liquidated his limited assets to satisfy her demand. And the result? When it's all finished, cash that is, she still wants more. And has she given the cash back? She tells me she will owe it back as I don't have it. This is not a relationship. This is parasitism. In business, we call this an unconscionable contract. You are designated as the CEO of the relationship, but you have 0 voting rights. You are only allowed to sign the checks. You have responsibility, but no authority. This is why the market is crashing. Men are realizing that the investment of marriage is actually a liability accumulation scheme. One of our analysts, Alternative Solutions, broke down the 3 stages of this specific contract. It is a progression that every man should memorize before signing any legal documents. Stage 1, the engagement ring, the initial buy-in. Stage 2, the wedding ring, the contract sealing. And Stage 3, the suffer ring. When you look at the chart, when you look at the stories of men like Kelvin, the trend line is obvious. The math doesn't math. And when the math doesn't math, the only winning move is to stop playing. You might be sitting there thinking, okay, the dinner date was a bad deal. I lost $150. I can recover from that. And you would be right. That is a short-term liquidity issue. But as a risk analyst, I am not concerned with your Friday night. I am concerned with your terminal value. I am concerned with the sunk cost fallacy that destroys entire bloodlines. Because the real danger isn't the woman who uses you for a free meal. The real danger is the woman who secures a long-term contract and then executes a malicious liquidation when you are least expecting it. Let's open a forensic audit on a specific case study from our database. I call this file The Crash. This is the story of a man named Mark, and I want you to pay very close attention to the timeline of this investment. Mark invested 44 years into a partnership. 4 decades. He provided capital. He provided security. He provided the labor required to maintain the infrastructure of a family. At age 62, the asset experienced a critical failure. Mark had a massive heart attack. He required triple bypass surgery. Now, in any rational insurance contract, a health crisis triggers a support clause. That is the implicit agreement of the institution. You pay premiums for 44 years so that you are covered when you crash. But let's audit the execution of this specific contract. While Mark was lying in the hospital bed, while the machines were keeping him alive, while the doctors were literally restarting his heart, he did not receive a visit from his partner. He did not receive flowers. He received divorce papers. Analyze the absolute ruthlessness of that trade. His partner, the person he invested his life into, waited until his market value was at its absolute lowest point. She waited until he was physically incapacitated, and then she executed a hostile takeover. She refused to answer her phone. Think about the indignity of that. A man who has provided for 44 years had to call a friend to drive him home from the ICU because his wife was too busy liquidating the estate. And what was the financial fallout? She emptied the savings. She drained the checking accounts. Mark lost 80% of his lifetime accumulation in a single quarter. He is now 72 years old. He lives in a converted van, and his final statement to the market is a testament to the negative ROI of modern marriage. I go where I want. There is no stress. I wish I had never gotten married. Gentlemen, this is not a divorce. This is asset stripping. The modern marriage contract contains no clause for bankruptcy protection for men. Your partner has the legal right to sell your shares the moment you become a liability. It is, mathematically speaking, the greatest Ponzi scheme in history. You pay into the fund for decades, believing there is a pension waiting for you. But when it's time to cash out, the fund is empty. When you look at charts like Mark's, the data becomes undeniable. The institution has mutated. It is no longer a partnership. It is a wealth transfer mechanism. One of our senior analysts, a man who has audited thousands of these cases, broke down the life cycle of this investment into 3 distinct stages. It is often told as a joke, but like all dark humor, it is rooted in diagnostic truth. Stage 1, the engagement ring. This is the initial public offering, IPO. The hype phase. The valuation is inflated based on speculation, not performance. Stage 2, the wedding ring. This is the contract lock-in. You have signed over your assets. You have merged your identity with a volatile entity. And Stage 3, the suffer ring. You laugh, but let's apply a cost-benefit analysis to that punchline. If you walked into an investment firm and the broker told you, this fund has a 50% failure rate, and for the 50% who stay in the fund, the primary dividend they receive is misery, silence, and resentment. Would you invest your life savings? Would you sign that paper? The SEC would shut that firm down for fraud. But in the relationship market, we call it romance. We gaslight young men into believing that not investing in this failing asset makes them defective. But the math proves otherwise. The defective element is the contract itself. This leads us to the fundamental conflict that is causing these crashes. We call it the authority gap. In economics, there is a concept called arbitrage. It means taking advantage of a price difference between 2 markets. Modern women have mastered lifestyle arbitrage. They are conditioned to demand traditional provision from the old market, while simultaneously demanding modern freedom from the new market. Let's look at the expectations. She wants you to pay the mortgage. That is a traditional expectation. She wants you to protect her from danger. Traditional. She wants you to initiate and lead. Traditional. But she refuses to cook or clean because that is oppressive. That is modern. She refuses to submit to your leadership because she is independent. Modern. She wants access to your resources, but she blocks access to her compliance. It is a business structure that is destined to fail. She wants the authority of a CEO. She wants to make the decisions on how resources are allocated, but she only accepts the responsibility of an unpaid intern. When the roof leaks, who climbs the ladder? You do. When the intruder breaks in, who goes downstairs? You do. When the bills are due, whose stress levels rise? Yours. You are working 60 hours a week. You are the structural engineer of her entire lifestyle. And when you ask for peace, when you ask for a hot meal, she calls it the bare minimum. Gentlemen, hear this clearly. In economics, when the cost of production approaches infinity, but the revenue is zero, you do not try harder. You do not communicate better. You close the factory. But here is the good news. The market is a ruthlessly efficient mechanism. It always corrects itself. It may take a year, it may take a decade, but reality is undefeated. You often hear the narrative that men are the ones who lose in divorce. And in the short term, financially, that is often true. But let's look at the long-term equity. Let's open the case study of a man named Timothy. This is a textbook example of a failed short sale. Timothy was married for 20 years. In 1998, his wife decided she needed to find herself. She bought into the cultural narrative that she was oppressed by her comfortable life. She wanted independence. She believed her market value was higher than what Timothy provided. So she initiated the split. She took 50% of the capital. She left. In financial terms, she shorted Timothy's future. She bet against him. She bet that she could sell her shares in the marriage and reinvest the capital into a more exciting life. The audit, 25 years later. Let's audit the books 25 years later. How did that trade work out? Where is the independent woman now? The report states she is living on a bare state pension in a derelict house, utterly dependent on the charity of neighbors and friends to survive. Her independence, without the infrastructure of the provider she discarded, was a delusion. She is functionally bankrupt. And what about Timothy, the asset she devalued? I am safe, warm, and dry in the civilized home she walked out of. Unmarried bliss. Gentlemen, this is a market correction. Timothy realized something crucial in that moment. He didn't lose a wife. He offloaded a liability. He stopped bleeding resources into a project that offered zero returns. She sold short on happiness, and the market squeezed her out. This is the lesson. You do not need to seek revenge. You do not need to be angry. You just need to wait. Because a person who makes decisions based on delusion will eventually collide with reality. The time arbitrage, the wall. This brings us to the most brutal force in the dating market. It is the one variable that no amount of feminism or social engineering can change. Time. There is a fundamental arbitrage opportunity that men fail to exploit. Women operate on a depreciating curve. Their highest leverage is at the start of the contract. Men, if they build themselves, if they focus on their empire, operate on an appreciating curve. It is the difference between milk and wine. Women believe they are 22 forever. They think the line of suitors will stretch to infinity. But then they hit age 35, and the phone stops ringing. Why? Because a 35-year-old high-value man, a man who has disciplined himself, built his wealth, and maintained his frame, is not looking for a 35-year-old woman with baggage, debt, and a bad attitude. He is not looking for a challenge. He has challenges at work. He is looking for peace. He is looking for a sanctuary, not a second job. The market for difficult women crashes after age 30. They price themselves out of the market, and watching them realize this. Watching the cognitive dissonance shatter as they face the unmarried box on the census form is the ultimate justice. But wait, you say. She shows me her phone. She has 1,000 matches on Tinder. Yes, let's analyze that liquidity. A woman opens an app and sees 1,000 likes. She feels like Cleopatra. She feels like the Queen of the Nile. She believes this proves her high market value. But as a risk analyst, I tell you, this is phantom liquidity. She does not realize that men swipe right on everything. It is a numbers game. It is a dragnet. Those 1,000 men do not want to marry her. They do not want to pay her mortgage. They do not want to hear about her day. They want to sleep with her once and never call again. There is a massive spread between sexual attention, which is cheap and abundant, and commitment value, which is expensive and scarce. She is confusing being easy with being valuable. She thinks she has 1,000 buyers lined up to purchase her house, but in reality, she has 1,000 people who just want to rent the bathroom for 5 minutes. And when she finally tries to cash in those 1,000 chips for a wedding ring, she finds out the exchange rate is 0. The backup plan delusion. This leads to the final insult, the backup plan strategy. She spent her 20s riding the carousel. She rejected the nice guys. She ignored the stable men. Now, at 33, she is tired. She wants to settle down, so she looks for you. She looks for the man she wouldn't even look at 10 years ago. She thinks, he is still there. He is desperate. He will be happy to have me. But here is the twist. That man isn't desperate anymore. He has spent the last 10 years building his career. He has money. He has freedom. He has peace. Why would he trade his hard-earned empire to be the safety net for someone else's reckless youth? Why would he pay full price for a depreciating asset that 50 other men got for free? The store is closed, gentlemen. You are not a backup plan. You are the prize. And the prize has left the building. So, what is the rational move for the modern man? Society screams at you, you will die alone. Who will take care of you when you are old? They try to shame you into compliance using fear tactics. But as an analyst, I do not operate on fear. I operate on data. Let's look at the Solitude portfolio of men who have actually lived this life. We have a statement from an 85-year-old man, a veteran of the game. When asked why he remained single, his answer was not one of regret. He said, I never married. I answer, I never made that mistake. Another community member, 65 years old, shares his quarterly report. My career skyrocketed. My net worth quadrupled, and I'm not giving it up for a skirt. Ever. Stop viewing solitude as a defect. You must reframe it. View it as asset class protection. Solitude, financial freedom, emotional stability. When you are alone, no one spends your money without permission. No one nags you for playing video games or buying a motorcycle. No one threatens to take your children or your house. You have 100% control over your resources. This is not loneliness. This is sovereignty. 2430, 26 inks. The superior investment, dogs versus humans. But biology dictates that men need companionship. So if the human partnership market is failing, let's look for a high-yield substitute. A 71-year-old man shares his strategy. I have lived with my wonderful dogs all my life. I have had a happy, stress-free life. You might laugh. But let's run the cost-benefit analysis on this trade. Compare a modern partner versus a dog. Loyalty, the dog is 100%. Unconditional. The partner, conditional on your paycheck and her mood. Emotional volatility, the dog, 0. The partner, high variance, random outbursts. Legal risk, can the dog divorce you and take half your retirement fund? No. If you invested the same amount of money into a dog that you invest into a modern relationship, that animal would treat you like a king. The modern relationship treats you like an ATM. The smart money is moving to the dog. The capital strike. We are witnessing a massive shift. One observer noted, most men didn't choose to be single. They were conditioned into it by experience. You get burned enough times, you stop touching the fire. This is neural pathway adaptation. It is a survival mechanism. When the environment becomes toxic to the organism migrates. We are not giving up. Giving up implies you wanted to win but failed. We are initiating a capital strike. We are removing our labor. We are removing our protection. We are removing our attention from a market that despises us. We are walking away. And remember the golden rule of game theory, summarized perfectly by user Ottoman. The only way to win is not to play. The final verdict: I breathe peace. So, gentlemen, be selfish, be strategic, build your own fortress. Do not apologize for having standards. Do not apologize for doing the math. If a woman wants to enter your life, she must apply for a visa. She must prove she is an asset, not a liability. She must prove she adds value to your empire, not just consumes it. And if she doesn't, you close the gate. You check your bank account. You look at your freedom. And you realize the truth spoken by our brother Centauro. I am a loser to women, but I breathe peace. I breathe peace. That is the ultimate dividend. That is the only ROI that matters. The audit is closed.